Hello, I'm Ryan. Welcome back to the SleepStory Collective. It's a real comfort to have you here tonight. Wherever you have come from today, and however the day has left you feeling, you have arrived now. You are here. You are in the quiet part of the evening. You are allowed to stop. There is nowhere else you need to hurry towards tonight. There is nothing more you need to prove before you rest. There is no final task that needs to be forced into place. There is no message that has to be answered in this very moment. There is no conversation that needs to be replayed from the beginning. There is no small mistake that needs to be held up to the light and studied until it changes. There is no decision that has to become clear before sleep can come near. There is no tomorrow that needs to be organized in the dark. There is no need to keep carrying the whole day in your hands. You can put it down. You can set the weight of it beside you. You can let the edges of it grow softer. At the SleepStory Collective, we only have one mission: to help you unwind, to help everything in you soften, to help you ease quietly and gently into sleep. And tonight, that begins before any story opens. It begins here with the simple permission to be exactly where you are. You do not need to make yourself feel calm all at once. You do not need to do this perfectly. You do not need to listen with effort. You do not need to hold every word. You only need to let the evening take one small step backwards, then another, then another. Let the surface beneath you take a little more of your weight. Let your body remember that it does not have to hold itself together so tightly now. Notice the places where you are supported: the back of the head, the shoulders, the spine, the hips, the legs, the heels. Let each of those places become a little heavier, not forced, not pushed, just naturally heavier, as though the room itself knows how to hold you. Let your hands soften. If your fingers have been curled or busy, they can uncurl now. If your palms have held the shape of the day, they can loosen. Let the wrists rest. Let the forearms rest. Let the elbows be ordinary and unguarded. Let the upper arms become quiet. Let the shoulders drop by whatever small amount they are ready to drop. Even a small release is enough. Let the back of your neck soften. Let your jaw loosen even slightly. There is no need to keep the mouth arranged. There is no need to hold the tongue tense. Let the tongue rest. Let the brow smooth. Let the tiny muscles around the eyes stop working so hard. The eyes do not need to search for anything now. The night is not asking them to look ahead. The night is simply inviting them to close, or to grow heavy, or to rest wherever they are. Take one slow breath that simply lets you arrive. Nothing dramatic, just a breath that says, I am here now. Let it leave you gently. Take another breath that gives the shoulders a little more permission to soften. Let it go without effort. And take one more breath, a quieter one, as though it is already beginning to belong to sleep. Let that one fade slowly. The breath can find its own rhythm from here. You do not have to manage it. You do not have to count it. You do not have to make it deeper than it wants to be. Just let it move through you like something kind and familiar, arriving, leaving, arriving again, leaving again. If thoughts are still moving through the mind, that is all right. Thoughts do not have to disappear for rest to begin. You do not have to empty anything. You do not have to win an argument with your own mind. Tonight, your thoughts can simply be placed a little further away, like small folded notes set on a shelf until morning, close enough to be found again if they are needed, far enough that you do not have to hold them now. Tomorrow can stay tomorrow. Plans can wait in their own place. Questions can rest without answers for a while. Anything unfinished can remain unfinished until morning. Nothing here depends on you solving it in the dark. Nothing here asks you to become sharper, faster, brighter, or more awake. This is a place for softening. This is a place where rest can begin before sleep fully arrives. And if you drift in and out tonight, that is perfectly fine. The story will not mind. It will keep its shape even if you hear only pieces of it. It will keep moving gently, whether you follow every word or only the feeling underneath. You do not need to stay awake to receive the comfort of it. You do not need to fall asleep quickly to be doing this well. You are already allowed to rest. You are already allowed to let go. Some evenings, sleep comes like a door opening. Some evenings it comes slowly, like warmth spreading through a room. Some evenings it begins as nothing more than the body being allowed to stop bracing. All of those ways are welcome here. There is no wrong way to listen. There is no wrong way to soften. There is no wrong way to arrive at the edge of sleep. This can become a familiar place in your night, a quiet return, a dependable room in the mind, a small shelter you can come back to whenever you need the world to ask less of you. And when you come back, the story will still be gentle. The welcome will still be waiting. The pace will still be slow. The door will still be open. For now, let the day become less important. Let its colors dim a little. Let the loud parts move further away. Let the unfinished parts lower themselves out of your hands. Let your body settle into the simple fact that nothing more is required of you tonight. Not one more thing. Not one more effort. Not one more performance of being all right. You can simply be here. You can simply be tired. You can simply be quiet. And only now, very gently, we can let the first hint of tonight's story begin to appear. Not quickly, not all at once, just as a soft suggestion at the edge of the mind. There is warm glass somewhere in the rain. There are tall panes silvered with droplets. There is the low, steady sound of water falling outside, while everything inside remains sheltered and still. There is the scent of damp earth resting in terracotta pots. There are fern fronds holding beads of moisture along their green edges. There are brass watering cans lined carefully beneath a wooden bench. There is amber lamplight touching leaves, tools, clay saucers, and folded linen cloths. And somewhere in that kind, enclosed warmth, someone calm is already tending to the small things. Tonight's story is called The Greenhouse Keeper of Warm Glass and Slow Rain. The greenhouse stood at the quiet edge of a sleeping garden. It was not a grand place in the showy sense. It did not need to be admired loudly. It was beautiful in the way useful, well-loved places become beautiful over time. Its glass rose in tall panels from a low brick wall. Its roof sloped gently towards narrow gutters where the rain gathered and ran in patient threads. Its door was painted a deep, softened green, the kind of green that seemed to belong to leaves, moss, and old shaded corners. At night, when the rain came slowly, the greenhouse glowed from within. Not brightly, not enough to disturb the garden, just enough to make the glass look warm, just enough to show the shapes of leaves resting behind it, just enough to say that someone had looked after the place before the night grew deep. The keeper of the greenhouse was called Rowan. Rowan was the only one who tended the greenhouse at night. He was steady in his movements. He was patient with small details. He never rushed a plant, a task, a sound, or a moment. He knew that a greenhouse did not stay comforting because of one grand act of care. It stayed comforting because of many little acts. A pane wiped clean, a vent eased open by a finger's width, a tray turned towards softer light, a yellowing leaf pinched away before it fell, a brass can filled before it was needed, a path swept so that morning footsteps would be quiet. Each evening, after the garden had darkened and the rain had settled into its slow rhythm, Rowan would come to the greenhouse door. He would stand for a moment beneath the shallow overhang, listening. The rain tapped the glass roof in 1,000 gentle places. The gutters whispered. Somewhere beyond the greenhouse walls, the soaked earth held the scent of grass, bark, and fallen petals. Inside, behind the glass, the air waited warm and green. Rowan would take a small iron key from his coat pocket. The key was smooth from years of use. He would slide it into the lock. He would turn it with no haste at all. The door would open with a soft wooden sigh, and the warmth of the greenhouse would come out to meet him. He always paused in the doorway. It was his first routine. Before he touched a tool, before he lifted a can, before he adjusted a single pot, Rowan let the greenhouse tell him how it was feeling. He noticed the warmth on his face. He noticed the dampness in the air. He noticed whether the rain had cooled the outer panes. He noticed the deep, quiet smell of soil. He noticed the small tick of droplets sliding down glass. He noticed which leaves had lifted themselves towards the lamplight and which had curled in for the night. Then, when everything had been quietly received, he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The greenhouse was arranged in long, gentle aisles. There were stone paths underfoot, worn smooth by years of careful walking. On either side were wooden benches, darkened by age and polished at the edges by hands, cloths, pots, and seasons. Terracotta pots rested in rows. Some held glossy leaves. Some held feathery herbs. Some held small young shoots, just beginning to understand the world above the soil. There were clay saucers, seed trays, folded linen, twine, wooden labels, and shallow bowls for cut stems. There were ferns in the cooler corner. There were climbing vines trained along thin supports. There were broad leaves near the warm brick wall, where the pipes kept a soft heat through the night. Nothing in the greenhouse was crowded. Everything had enough room to breathe. Rowan hung his coat on a peg near the door. He placed the iron key in a shallow dish beside a stack of clean cloths. Then he took down the first lantern from its hook. It was already lit, but low. He turned the little brass wheel until the flame settled into a warmer glow. The glass of the lantern held a faint blur of condensation. Rowan wiped it with the corner of a cloth. The light cleared. The nearest leaves shone softly. Then he placed the lantern on the first bench, exactly where its circle of light would reach the row of small potted herbs. He did not begin with the most important task. In the greenhouse, importance was spread evenly. The smallest task could make the night easier for every living thing inside. So Rowan began with the path. He lifted the old broom from its place beside the door. The broom had a wooden handle, smooth where his hands had held it over many evenings. He swept slowly along the central stones, not because the path was untidy, it was rarely untidy, but because sweeping told the greenhouse that the night's care had begun. The bristles whispered over stone. A little scatter of dry soil moved to the edge. One fallen leaf slid gently ahead of the broom. Rowan gathered it into his palm and placed it in the small basket for leaf cuttings. Then he swept on. Outside, the rain thickened slightly. It made the roof sound closer. Inside, the greenhouse remained warm. The air smelled of compost, rain-cooled glass, green stems and faint rosemary. Rowan moved down the path with the same even pace. Sweep, pause, sweep again, check the left bench, check the right, let the broom rest lightly, gather the small things, leave the path smooth. By the time he returned the broom to its hook, the greenhouse seemed to have settled around him. The work had not disturbed the quiet. It had deepened it. Next, Rowan walked to the long shelf where the cloths were kept. He chose a soft linen square and folded it once across his hand. Then he began to wipe the lower panes of glass. Only the inside. Only where the evening warmth had met the rain-cooled surface and left a veil of mist. He wiped in slow circles. The cloth passed over the glass with a hush. A clear patch appeared. Beyond it, the garden was blurred and dark. Drops of rain ran down the outer surface like tiny silver threads. Rowan did not try to see too far outside. The night beyond the greenhouse could remain soft and indistinct. Inside was enough. He moved from pane to pane. Wipe, fold the cloth, wipe again. Paused to feel whether the glass was too cool. Moved to the next pane. The work had a rhythm that required almost no thought. It was the kind of rhythm the body could trust, the kind of rhythm that made the mind loosen its grip. Each cleaned pane held the lantern light a little better. Each cleared square made the greenhouse feel more carefully held. When Rowan reached the corner near the ferns, he lowered the cloth and listened. The rain was slower again. The greenhouse gave a small wooden creak as it adjusted to the night air. Nothing needed fixing. Nothing needed hurry. Everything was simply settling. The ferns lived where the warmth softened but did not gather too heavily. Their fronds reached out in layered green fans. Some were fine and feathery. Some were broader, with edges like quiet little combs. Rain always seemed to suit them, even from the other side of the glass. Rowan checked them every night. He bent slightly, keeping his movements slow. He looked beneath the fronds for fallen pieces. He touched the surface of the soil with 2 fingers. Not digging, not disturbing, just feeling. The soil was damp enough. The leaves were clean. One frond had browned at the very tip. Rowan took the small copper scissors from his apron pocket. He clipped the dry edge away. The cut was neat. The fern looked no different to anyone who did not know it well. But Rowan knew. That was enough. He placed the tiny brown cutting in the basket. Then he moved along the fern bench, checking each pot in turn. The terracotta held a faint warmth. The saucers beneath were not too full. The leaves did not crowd each other. Where one pot had shifted slightly, he turned it back into line. Where another leaned towards the lamp, he rotated it by a small degree, so tomorrow's light would find the other side. These were not dramatic acts. They were the quiet agreements between a keeper and a place he loved. Every evening, a little adjusting. Every evening, a little noticing. Every evening, a little care given before it was needed. At the end of the fern bench stood a brass watering can. It was wide-bellied, with a long, narrow spout and a handle darkened by use. Rowan lifted it with both hands. It was half full. He could tell by the weight. He carried it to the stone basin at the back of the greenhouse.
The basin was fed by a pipe that collected clean rainwater from the roof. On rainy nights, the pipe made a soft, hollow trickle. Rowan set the can beneath the tap. He opened it gently. Water began to fall. Not loudly, just a low, bright pouring into brass. He waited until the can was full enough for the rounds, but never so full that it would be heavy or clumsy. Then he closed the tap. One last drop fell. Then another. Then stillness. Rowan carried the can to the herb bench. He did not water everything. That was one of the first things a good keeper learned. Care was not the same as doing too much. Some pots wanted water. Some wanted only warmth. Some wanted to be left alone. He touched the soil in each pot. Lavender, dry enough to wait. Mint, ready for a little. Thyme, no need tonight. Parsley, just a thread of water at the edge. Basil, warm and still. Rosemary, quiet in its clay pot. He tipped the can with delicate control.
The water slid from the spout in a thin, clear line. It darkened the soil. It released a deeper scent. Then he stopped. There was comfort in restraint. There was comfort in knowing that every pot had its own measure. Rowan moved slowly along the bench. Touch the soil. Notice the leaves. Pour only where needed. Pause before the next. Let the water settle. Let the scent rise. Let the night continue. Outside, rain crossed the roof in soft, uneven whispers. Inside, the can gave small, hollow notes as the water moved inside it. The greenhouse seemed to breathe in green. When the herb bench was done, Rowan set the watering can on its usual slate square. He wiped the spout with a cloth, a small detail, always done. A drop left on brass could fall where it was not wanted. A clean spout meant the next pour would begin neatly. He folded the cloth and placed it on the bench. Then he moved to the seed trays. The seed trays were arranged on the warmest table near the brick wall. Each tray was shallow and wooden, lined with dark soil. Some held sleeping seeds beneath the surface. Some had tiny green loops just beginning to rise. Some held rows of seedlings so delicate that a breath seemed almost too much. Rowan approached them with particular stillness. He lowered the lamp flame slightly. He leaned close enough to see, but not so close that he cast too much heat. The labels stood at the edge of each tray, small wooden markers, carefully written, not for show, simply so each thing could be known by its name. He checked the first tray by sight, then the second by touch, then the third by lifting one corner and feeling the weight of the soil. He had done this for so long that the difference between too dry and just right was in his hands before it was in his thoughts. One tray needed misting, not watering, just misting. Rowan took the glass mister from the shelf. He pumped it once away from the tray to make sure the spray was fine. Then he held it above the seedlings and released a soft cloud of water. The droplets settled like breath. The tiny leaves brightened. He waited. Then he misted once more. That was enough. He returned the mister to its saucer. He turned the tray by the width of 2 fingers. Tomorrow morning, the first light would come from the east side of the greenhouse. Tonight, the tray could be ready for it. Rowan did not hurry the morning. He simply prepared for it. There is a certain comfort in things being made ready before they are needed. A cup placed where a hand will reach. A path swept before a foot steps down. A seed tray turned before the sun arrives. A warm room kept warm before anything asks for warmth. The greenhouse lived by that kind of care. Rowan crossed to the wall where the vents were set high beneath the roof. The greenhouse held warmth well, but warmth still needed balance. Too much of it could make the air heavy. Too little could leave the leaves tight and cold. Rowan took the long wooden pole from its hooks. At the end was a brass notch that fitted into the vent handle. He raised it slowly. The pole touched the handle. He turned it. The upper vent opened by the smallest amount. A breath of rain-cooled air entered from above. It did not chill the greenhouse. It only freshened it. The scent changed slightly. Warm soil, slow rain, leaf sap, old wood, clean glass. Rowan opened one more vent by the same small measure. Then he rested the pole against his shoulder and listened again. Listening was part of every task. He listened after opening a vent. He listened after watering. He listened after wiping glass. The greenhouse always answered, though never in words. A pipe ticked. A leaf shifted. Rain softened. The flame in the lantern steadied. The air felt balanced now. Rowan returned the pole to its hooks. He ran his hand once along the wood to make sure it was properly settled. Then he moved on. There was a bench of larger pots near the center. Their leaves were broad and glossy. Some had deep green surfaces that caught the lamplight like quiet water. Some had pale veins, delicate and even. Some had new leaves still curled like small sleeping hands. Rowan spent time with these plants. They asked for no urgency, only attention. He checked each saucer. He turned each pot slightly. He removed one dry leaf that had fallen behind a stem. He brushed loose soil from the bench into his palm. He pressed one label back into place, not too deep, not too shallow. Then he stood for a moment and let the warmth rise around him. The rain outside made the whole greenhouse feel held. There are nights when rain can sound restless, but this was not that kind of rain. This was slow rain, steady rain, rain that did not knock or insist, rain that simply laid itself over the garden and stayed. On the roof, it became a soft pattern. Along the gutters, it became a murmur. On the path outside, it became a dark shine. Against the glass, it became moving beads of silver. Inside, it became a deeper quiet. Rowan returned to the central aisle. He stood beneath the highest point of the roof and looked up. The glass above him was dark, except where the lantern glow touched it. Rain ran down the sloped panes in uneven lines. Some drops traveled quickly. Some joined other drops and slowed. Some rested for a long while before moving on. Rowan watched without needing to follow each one. The greenhouse was full of such small, unimportant beauties. Small enough not to demand anything. Gentle enough to rest inside. After a while, he lowered his gaze and continued the round. Next came the warm pipes. They ran along the base of the brick wall, low and steady. Not hot, only warm. The kind of warmth that kept the roots comfortable and the night air kind. Rowan crouched beside them. He placed his hand near, not on, the pipe. The warmth was even. He checked the small gauge. The needle rested exactly where it should. He tapped the side once, out of habit. Then he checked the folded cloth laid beneath the valve. Dry, clean, ready. Nothing needed adjusting. Still, he wrote the temperature in the small notebook that lived on the shelf above the basin. The notebook had a green cloth cover. Its pages were filled with simple entries. Rain steady. Vent open 1 finger. Ferns damp enough. Seedlings misted. Pipes even. No entry was dramatic. No entry asked to be remembered by anyone else. They were only the record of care. Proof that the small things had been noticed. Proof that the night had been kept. Rowan sharpened the pencil with a tiny brass sharpener. He brushed the shavings into the compost dish. Then he closed the notebook. There was still more to do, but none of it pressed. That was the way of the greenhouse at night. Tasks waited in their proper order. The keeper moved to them in time. Nothing shouted. Nothing rushed ahead. The next bench held trailing plants in hanging pots. Their stems fell in long, soft lines, some touching the air just above Rowan's shoulder. He checked them by lifting the vines gently in his palm. A twist here, a loosened tendril there. One stem had found its way around the hanging chain. Rowan unwound it carefully. He guided it back towards the wooden support. It rested there without resistance. He did this with every hanging pot. Lift, check, loosen, guide. Let the leaves fall softly back into place. The motion was almost like smoothing a blanket. Not because the plants were fragile in a worrying way, but because gentleness had become the natural language of the greenhouse. Even the practical work had softness in it. Even the necessary tasks felt like care. When the hanging pots were settled, Rowan crossed to the small table near the door. On it were clean clay pots stacked by size. Beside them were saucers, twine, folded paper packets, a dibber, and a shallow bowl of washed stones. Every object had its place. Rowan checked the stacks. He did not count them out loud. He simply looked. Large pots at the back, medium pots to the left, small pots nested together at the front, saucers turned upside down so no water would collect, twine wound neatly, labels dry, pencils sharp, cloths folded. The small table was ready. He took 3 empty pots from the stack and placed them beside the seed trays. There were seedlings that would soon need more room. Not tonight, not yet, but soon. Rowan liked to prepare gently ahead, not with worry, not with rushing, only with the quiet pleasure of readiness. When the moment came, the pots would be there. The soil would be sifted. The labels would be written. The roots would not have to wait. At the back of the greenhouse was the soil bench. It had a deeper tray built into the wood. Beside it were 3 lidded bins. One held compost, one held leaf mold, one held fine sand. Rowan lifted each lid. He breathed in the familiar earth scent. Compost rich and dark. Leaf mold soft and woodland deep. Sand clean and pale. He replaced the lids. Then he sifted a small amount of compost through the round metal sieve. The sound was soft and granular, a quiet shush. Dark soil fell into the tray below. Any small twig or stone stayed behind. Rowan tipped those into the compost dish. Nothing wasted, nothing hurried. He sifted enough for the morning's work. Not too much. Enough. Then he folded a square of brown paper and covered the prepared soil lightly. He set a smooth stone on one corner to hold it down. The soil would stay ready through the night. Warm. Fine. Waiting. Rowan brushed the bench clean with a hand broom. He wiped the edge with a damp cloth. Then he stepped back and nodded once. The soil bench was settled. By now the greenhouse had become even quieter. Not silent, never silent. The rain still moved over the glass. The pipes still gave their occasional tiny ticks. Leaves sometimes shifted as droplets settled, or air moved through the high vents. But the quiet had thickened. It had become the kind of quiet that gathers when a place has been gently cared for. Rowan felt it around him. He did not speak. There was no need. He took the lantern from the herb bench and carried it to the far end of the greenhouse. This end was cooler. It held pots that liked shade, shelves of moss, and shallow trays where cuttings rested beneath glass covers. The moss trays were soft and green. Some pieces were rounded like little cushions. Some were fine and feathery. Some held droplets that shone when the lantern passed. Rowan checked the covers over the cuttings. He lifted each glass bell slightly to let in fresh air. Then he lowered it again, a soft ring of glass against clay. Again, lift
Let the air pass. Lower. Soft ring. Under one bell, 3 cuttings leaned towards each other. Rowan adjusted the little wooden support behind them. He did it with one finger. The stems straightened gently. The leaves no longer touched the glass. That was all they needed. A little space, a little air, a little attention before trouble could begin. He moved to the next bell, then the next. The same action returned, quiet and sure. Lift, breathe, lower. Check, move on. The far corner held a chair. It was not a grand chair. It was wooden, with a woven seat, and it stood beside a narrow table where Rowan sometimes rested the notebook. He did not sit yet. The chair was for later. For the moment, near the end of the rounds, when the greenhouse had been checked and there was nothing more to do but keep company with the rain. For now, the chair simply waited. Like everything else in the greenhouse, it waited peacefully. Rowan turned back down the aisle. He could see the whole length of the greenhouse from there. The lanterns made warm islands of light. The glass held a dim reflection of leaves, shelves, and his slow-moving shape. The central path was swept. The lower panes were clear. The ferns were trimmed. The herbs were watered only where needed. The seed trays were misted and turned. The vents were opened by a small, careful measure. The warm pipes were even. The hanging vines were loosened. The potting table was ready. The soil was sifted. The cuttings had been aired. All of it made a quiet pattern. All of it said that the night was being held. Still, Rowan made another round. A keeper knew that the second round was different from the first. The first round found what needed doing. The second round noticed what had changed after care had been given. Water settled. Air shifted. Leaves lifted. Soil darkened. Glass cleared. Warmth moved differently. Rowan began again at the door. He checked that the key was in the dish. He checked that his coat was dry enough on the peg. He checked the mat beneath the door for rainwater. Only a few drops had come in with his boots. He wiped them away. Then he moved on. At the herb bench, the mint smelled brighter. The parsley soil had darkened evenly. The rosemary still needed nothing. The basil leaves sat broad and calm. Rowan touched the edge of one saucer. Dry? Good. He lifted the watering can. A little water remained. He carried it back to the basin and emptied the rest into the rain barrel. He never left water standing in the can overnight. Brass liked to be emptied, wiped, and left ready. He dried the inside of the rim with a cloth. Then he set the can upside down on its wooden rack. At the seed table, the mist had settled into the soil. No droplets clung too heavily to the young leaves. The glass mister was clean. The trays were angled correctly for morning. Rowan warmed his hands near the pipe before touching the edge of the smallest tray. Not too warm, just enough. Then he adjusted the paper label that had leaned slightly to one side. It stood straight now. The seedlings slept beneath their small names. At the fern bench, the cut tip was almost invisible. The fronds overlapped softly.
A bead of water had gathered at the end of one leaf and would not fall. Rowan left it. Some things do not need correcting. Some things only need to be allowed. He watched the droplet for a moment. It held the lantern light. Then he moved away. The rain became softer again. There was space between its touches on the roof. A tap, a hush, a pause, then another gentle run of water along the glass. The whole greenhouse seemed to listen with Rowan. In the quiet spaces between raindrops, the leaves had their own stillness. The pots had their own steady weight. The warm bricks held the day's last memory of heat. And the night held everything together without effort. Rowan returned to the vents. He lifted his face slightly. The air was fresh enough now. The rain outside had cooled. He took the pole and closed one vent halfway. Not fully, just halfway. The other he left as it was. Balance again. Always balance. Not too much, not too little. Only what the night asked for. He replaced the pole and laid his palm briefly against the wooden hook to make sure it held firm. Then he went to the small clock above the potting bench. It had a round face and no loud tick. Its hands moved with a quiet, almost hidden patience. Rowan checked the time, not because he was late. Nothing in the greenhouse was late, but because certain tasks belonged to certain hours. The first round belonged to arrival, the second to settling. The next part belonged to keeping company. He wound the clock once. The key turned smoothly. He stopped before it tightened too far. The clock did not need more than it needed. Neither did anything else. Near the clock was a shelf of jars. Each jar held something useful and ordinary. Clean plant ties, tiny pebbles, spare labels, dried chamomile heads saved for scenting cloths, a little beeswax for the wooden handles, fine twine, clips, seeds in folded packets. Rowan checked the lids by touch. One was loose. He tightened it. Another had a smear of soil on the glass. He wiped it clear. Then he took down the small tin of beeswax. The handles of the tools were already smooth, but on rainy nights, Rowan liked to give one handle a little care. Tonight, it was the small hand fork. He rubbed a little beeswax into the wood with a cloth. The scent rose warm and faint. Wood, wax, rain, soil. He worked slowly until the handle had a gentle sheen. Then he placed the hand fork back in its row. A cared-for tool made the next day easier. A cared-for tool made the hand feel welcome. The row of tools hung neatly on the board. Trowel, fork, scissors, dibber, hand broom, string knife folded shut. Each one had its shape drawn lightly behind it, so it could return to its place without thought. Rowan ran his eyes along the row. Everything was there. Everything was clean. Everything was safe. The greenhouse did not need perfection. It only needed care that could be trusted. He took the basket of leaf cuttings to the compost crock. The crock stood outside the back door of the greenhouse, beneath a little roofed alcove. Rowan opened the inner door first. A cool breath of wet air entered. He stepped into the alcove without leaving the shelter. The rain sounded clearer there. The garden smelled dark and washed. He tipped the cuttings into the crock. Fern tip, fallen leaf, tiny stem, bits of dry soil. All of it would soften, break down, and become useful again. He closed the crock. He returned inside. He wiped his shoes on the mat. Then he closed the inner door. The warmth of the greenhouse met him again. It felt even more welcoming after that brief touch of cold rain. Rowan stood just inside and let his hands warm. He did not rush to the next action. There is a kind of care in pausing between tasks. A pause lets the place settle. A pause lets the body notice that all is well. A pause lets the next task arrive naturally. So Rowan paused. The rain continued. The glass glowed. The leaves rested. After the pause, he walked to the narrow table beside the chair. There he placed the notebook, the pencil, and the lantern. He sat down slowly. The chair accepted his weight with a soft creak. From that place, he could see the ferns, the seed table, and the long run of glass. He could hear the water moving in the gutters. He could smell the damp clay pots and warm soil. He could feel the greenhouse breathing in its own quiet way. This was not idleness. This was part of the keeping. A place that is cared for also needs to be witnessed, not watched anxiously, not inspected sharply, just witnessed. Rowan sat with the greenhouse as rain moved over it. He noticed the light. He noticed the dark. He noticed the slow shine on the leaves. He noticed that the open vent allowed the lantern flame to move only slightly. He noticed the air was calm. He noticed that nothing needed him urgently. And because nothing needed him urgently, he could sit still. The rain made a pattern. Not one pattern, really. Many small patterns woven together. Fine rain on high glass. Fuller drops from the gutter lip. Water ticking into the barrel. A soft rush when the wind passed over the roof. Then quiet again. Rowan listened the way a person listens to something they trust. There was no message inside the rain, no hidden instruction, only sound. Steady, slow, kind to the night. After a while, Rowan opened the notebook again. He did not write a report. He wrote one simple line. All settled under slow rain. Then he dated the page. He blew gently across the inkless pencil mark, though there was no need. It was an old habit. He closed the notebook. He placed the pencil on top. Then he sat back again. The greenhouse was warm, but not heavy. Sheltered, but not sealed. Quiet, but not empty. It had the comforting feeling of a room where someone had already checked the little things. The panes were clear enough. The vents were balanced. The paths were swept. The tools were clean. The plants had been seen. The water had been measured. The warmth had been held. Nothing was waiting in a sharp or urgent way. Rowan rose from the chair. The keeping was not quite finished. There were the night lamps to lower. There was the door latch to check. There were the cloths to hang. There was one final look along the benches. He picked up the lantern and carried it back to the central aisle. The glow moved with him. Leaves brightened as he passed, then softened again behind him. The glass caught his reflection, then let it go. He began with the cloths. The damp pane cloth went to the drying rail near the pipes. He shook it once, folded it over, smoothed the edge. The bench cloth went beside it. The dry cloths remained stacked near the door. He counted them with his hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Enough for morning. He did not need to count again. Then he lowered the first lamp. The flame drew down slowly. The nearest herbs lost their bright edges and became softer shapes. He lowered the second lamp. The fern corner deepened into green shadow. He lowered the third. The seed trays rested under a mild amber glow, enough to keep the room feeling watched over, not enough to trouble the night. Rowan never put the greenhouse into darkness all at once. Light, like sound, could be softened gradually. The rain on the roof seemed louder after the lamps were lowered, or perhaps the greenhouse was simply listening more closely. Rowan stood near the central path and let his eyes adjust. The room was still visible. Bench lines, pot shapes, the pale marks of labels, the low gleam of warm pipes, the silver movement of rain beyond the glass. Everything was gentler now. Everything had moved one step closer to sleep. He walked the final round, from door to basin, from basin to seed table, from seed table to fern bench, from fern bench to the hanging pots, from hanging pots to the soil bench, from soil bench to the chair, from the chair back to the door. At each place he did only what was needed. Straighten a cloth, touch a saucer, check a latch, turn a lamp a little lower, brush a crumb of soil from the path, lift one vine away from the edge of a shelf. Small things, always small things. That questions of it. At the hanging pots, he paused again. One trailing leaf had caught a droplet from the roof's inner frame.
The droplet rested there, perfectly round. Rowan watched until it slid down the leaf and disappeared into the pot below. No waste, no alarm, no alarm. Just water finding its place. At the soil bench, the paper still covered the sifted compost. The stone still held the corner. The bins were closed. The sim was 10. The voice port pressed the page of the paper once. It lay flat. Morning would forward the ready. At the seed table, the young leaves were almost too small to cast shadows. They rested under the softest lamp. Rowan did not touch them now. He only looked. There are times when care means tending. There are times when care means leaving your something undisturbed. Tonight, the seedlings needed the second kind, so 4 Rowan gave them smostness. At the herb bench, the scent of des bench, near the front, rosemary deeper and drier.
Basil, warm. Thyme, faint and low. Damp clay beneath all of it. Rowan breathed once, quietly. The breath was not a task. It was just a way of sharing the room for a moment. Then he moved on. Near the door, he checked the latch without opening it. Secure. He checked the mat. Dry enough. He checked the key in the dish. Waiting. He checked his coat. Still damp at the shoulders, but not dripping. He checked the little shelf above the door, where a spare candle, matches, and a folded note of supply reminders were kept. Everything was in place. The note did not need reading tonight. He knew what was on it. More labels before Friday. Fresh twine. A small bag of sand. Nothing urgent. Nothing for now. He left it where it was. Not every note needs to be answered the moment it is noticed. Some things can wait in their own time. Rowan returned to the chair one final time. He did not sit. He stood beside it and looked across the greenhouse. The rain had become very fine, the kind of rain that seems almost suspended in the air. On the glass, it made a delicate shimmer. The greenhouse held its warmth. The plants held their quiet. The lamps held their low amber circles. The night held the garden beyond. Everything belonged. He whispered, though there was no one to wake. All settled. That was all. 2 small words. Not a spell, not a ceremony. Just the truth of the room. All settled. Then he took the notebook and pencil from the narrow table and returned them to their shelf. He lifted the lantern by its handle. He walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned once more. This was not because he doubted his work. It was because a final look is part of love for a place. The greenhouse looked back in its own way. Warm glass, slow rain, dark leaves, clean paths, waiting soil, resting tools. Everything quiet, everything ready. Rowan put on his coat. He took the key from the dish. He opened the door gently. Cool rain air touched the threshold. He stepped out beneath the shallow overhang. Then he closed the door until the latch met softly. The greenhouse remained glowing behind the glass. He turned the key. The lock gave a low, familiar click. He slipped the key into his pocket. Then he stood outside for a moment, listening from the other side. From outside, the greenhouse sounded different. The rain was fuller. The glass roof carried the sound outward. The gutters ran more clearly. But through the panes, the lamps still glowed softly. The plants were only silhouettes now. The warmth could not be seen directly, but it could be felt in the golden color of the glass. A kept place has a certain look at night. Not bright, not busy, just held. Rowan walked slowly along the outside path. He did not leave immediately. He checked the gutters where they curved down into the barrel. Water moved freely. He checked the little brick channel that carried overflow away from the door. Clear. He checked the roofline from below. No branch touched the glass. No latch rattled. No pane stood loose. The greenhouse was safe in the rain. At the far corner, he stopped beneath the climbing rose that slept against the outer frame. Its leaves were dark and wet. Its branches had been tied back earlier in the season, so they would not scrape the glass when the wind rose. Rowan touched one tie, still firm, soft enough not to cut, useful enough to hold. That was all. He returned to the front of the greenhouse. The rain gathered on his coat, but he did not mind. He liked the difference between the cool, wet garden and the warm glass room. One made the other kinder. Outside, the night washed everything clean. Inside, the warmth protected what needed shelter. Both had their place. Both were gentle tonight. Rowan stood at the door once more. Through the glass, he could see the central aisle disappearing into amber shadow. The broom rested in its place. The brass watering can drained upside down on its rack. The cloths hung near the warm pipes. The ferns were still. The seed trays were faint and low. The greenhouse did not need him to go back in. That was how he knew the evening's work was complete. He turned away at last. The path from the greenhouse led through the garden in a soft curve. There were no bright lights outside, only a small shielded lamp beside the potting shed and the dim glow from the greenhouse behind him. Rain darkened the gravel. Wet leaves leaned over the path. The air smelled of earth, stone, and rainwater. Rowan walked slowly, listening to the sound of his steps. Crunch, soften, crunch, soften. The garden accepted him quietly. He did not go far. His small night room was attached to the potting shed, close enough that he could return if a storm ever asked for him. But tonight there was no storm, only slow rain, only kept warmth, only the satisfaction of a place prepared. At the shed door, Rowan removed his wet boots. He placed them on the mat. He hung his coat on a peg beneath the little roof. He took the greenhouse key from his pocket and placed it in a small wooden bowl by the door. Then he stepped inside. The night room was simple. A chair, a table, a narrow bed, a kettle, a shelf of notebooks, a small window facing the greenhouse. Rowan lowered the lamp until the room was dim. Through the window, he could still see the greenhouse glowing faintly through the rain. That was enough. He did not need to keep watching. He only liked knowing it was there. He washed his hands in warm water. Soil lifted from the lines of his fingers. The scent of mint and damp leaves remained faintly on his skin. He dried his hands on a rough towel. He folded the towel back onto its rail. Then he poured a little warm water into a plain cup. No ceremony, no fuss, just warmth in the hands before sleep. He sat by the window. The cup warmed his palms. The greenhouse glowed beyond the rain. The lamps inside were low enough that only the shape of the roof and the long, pale rectangles of glass could be seen. Rowan thought of the seed trays ready for morning, the herbs watered only as needed, the vents balanced, the pipes steady, the cloths drying, the path swept. Everything had been given its quiet portion of care. Everything could rest. He did not think far beyond that. He did not plan the morning in detail. Morning would arrive when it arrived. The greenhouse would be there. The soil would be ready. The pots would be waiting. The rain barrel would be full. The plants would have passed through the night in warmth. For now, there was nothing more to arrange. Rowan finished the warm water. He set the cup on the table. He stood and checked the room in the same gentle way he checked the greenhouse. Lamp low, window latched, boots by the door, coat hanging, key in the bowl, notebook closed, bed turned down. Nothing left undone, nothing calling him back. Before lying down, he looked once more through the window. The rain had softened the view. The greenhouse was no longer a clear shape. It was a warm blur in the dark, a quiet promise of shelter, a room of leaves and glass, still holding the care he had given it. Rowan let the sight rest in him. Then he let it go. He lay down. The room was quiet. The rain continued. The greenhouse remained warm. The garden remained washed and still. The night asked nothing more. And inside the greenhouse, everything settled deeper. The herbs released their faint scents into the warm air. The ferns held their droplets. The seedlings rested beneath their labels. The sifted soil waited under brown paper. The tools hung clean on the board. The watering can dried on its rack. The vents held their careful balance. The lamps burned low. The glass kept the rain outside and the warmth within.